And of course, today is day 23 of the Omer, and we have two particular qualities today that we can work on in our practice and our lives. Today is the day of Gevura, which is discipline or restraint. Actually, that was 2 weeks ago. Gevura was our primary quality. Today, it's a supporting quality, plays a supporting role for Netzach, which is this week's dominant quality, or dominant Sefira or Midah. And of course, we sent out a grounding essay by my good friend and teacher, Rabbi Jordan Ben Dadapel, to help people orient themselves to Netzach. And, what we can say about these two qualities is that the primary quality, which this week is Netzach, eternity, victory, and we'll say more about what Netzach is in just a moment, is what we're aiming for, essentially. The quality we're hoping to cultivate in our lives and our relationships. And the quality of Gevura today, anyway, helps us to actually make sure that our intention to embody Netzach in our lives also has within it a little bit of Gevura, a little bit of discipline and restraint as a support. So we'll talk about that in just a moment, but I just want to kind of orient us to this quality in brief in case we didn't have a chance to read this week's opening essay. I also noticed some people here who are participants in my meditation class sitting with the Sefirot, which is a meditation class that's based in the 7 lower Sefirot of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. So I might share something today that you've heard already, and that's okay, because it's always good to come back to first principles and deepen into what we may already know or have practiced. But some of this may sound familiar to some of you. And for others, this may be totally new. And I've been very deeply inspired by a teacher named Sarah Evian, who I believe lives in Israel. And she wrote a little essay in a Siddur that she created called Beloved of the Soul Siddur. It's a very beautiful contemplative Siddur. And she also has some reflections about the 10 Sefirot, and particularly today, this quality of Netzach. So let me just share my screen here and we'll go from there and take a look at her reflections here. Just give me thumbs up if you can see my screen here. Great. Here's what she says. Netzach is translated literally as endurance and victory. It's related to the Hebrew root nun tzadi chet, which means to be victorious or to be eternal. So it has a sense of endurance, right? Going the distance, and victory in the sense of being able to overcome obstacles that get in our way as we're hoping to achieve our goals. And according to the Kabbalah, this is a masculine power, because in the Kabbalah, masculinity is associated with expansiveness and femininity is associated more with containment and receptivity. That may ring untrue for us or even problematic for us. I just want us to understand how the Kabbalah understands these particular spiritualized gender roles. And Netzach has this kind of expansive quality, right? Because it's about going the distance over a period of time. And it resides on the right hip area, according to the traditional mapping of the Sefirot on the human body. Let's think about this, right? The hip propels me forward, taking me where I need to go. In the same way, Netzach is my ability to take my intentions forward and bring them to fruition. As the place of ambition, it requires confidence, perseverance, commitment, and dedication. Right? Through healthy Netzach, because with each of these qualities, there's ways in which we can practice them in extreme and unbalanced and corrosive ways. But when it comes to healthy, balanced Netzach, I ascertain when and how to use its energy to make my dreams come true through mastery, hard work, and commitment. Okay. So really, Netzach is about kind of the active principle, being able to take our intentions and make them manifest through action, through planning, through commitment, through dedication, through effort, through perseverance. Sometimes when I think of Netzach, I think of grit, right? And all of us already have practiced in some way, shape, or form in our lives this quality of Netzach, right? Think of any time in your life when you had an intention or a dream and you wanted to make it a reality, and you actually then applied effort and determination and grit, and you persevered and you overcame obstacles along the way and kind of retooled, you know, and realigned your sights and got back on the path you had intended to walk. And then eventually you were victorious. You actually achieved your goal. This could be a very large goal, it could be a very small goal, right? In all of these kinds of situations, we are practicing Netzach. It's not a quality we need to acquire somewhere else. It's already inside of us. Though some of us may incline naturally toward Netzach, right? We may be kind of type A personalities by our conditioning and character, and others perhaps may find it harder at times to muster Netzach under certain situations or conditions. So I just want to see by show of thumbs up, right? How many of us actually recognize this quality in ourselves in some way, shape, or form, right? Because we've actually used it or practiced it in some way. Okay, a lot of thumbs up. And how many of us perhaps find it a little hard to do this, right? We find ourselves procrastinating, or maybe we have a hard time taking our visions and bringing them down in a concrete way and, kind of activating them and operationalizing them. That's okay. Yeah, I see some hands here too. I tend to be more of a visionary, and it's a little bit harder for me to take my big ideals, right, and bring them down in a very concrete way and make kind of a strategic plan for how to activate them and bring them to fruition. But I do it nevertheless, and there's other areas in my life where Netzach comes very naturally to me. So this is just something to pay attention to this week. Now, when I think of Netzach, I often go to my favorite story about how a rabbi kind of got his rabbinic career going, and specifically the story of Rabbi Akiva. And I think this story is very demonstrative in terms of how we think about how to practice Netzach. So we're going to take a quick look at it, and then we're going to practice. Here it is. It comes from Avot de Rabbi Natan, which is actually a rabbinic commentary on Pirkei Avot, on the tractate of the Mishnah that is called the Ethics of the Fathers. I asked the question, how did Rabbi Akiva get started? Apparently there was a story floating around in the rabbinic kind of corpus of lore that they had. And this is a story that they told. They said he was 40 years old and he hadn't studied anything, right? Very unlettered, unschooled. And this is because he was very poor. Once he was standing by a well, and he said, "Who etched this stone?" They told him, "The water that falls on it every day." And so imagine a drop of water falling on stone, one drop at a time, over the course of days, weeks, months, years, right? The water actually bored etchings into the stone. They said to him, "Akiva, have you not studied the verse, 'Water wears away stone'?" Of course, this is very insulting to someone who has no, Jewish education. And he, if he were alive now, he might say, "Duh, no, I haven't studied that verse. I don't even know Hebrew," right? And nevertheless, he did not take umbrage with them. He did not become enraged or upset. And he immediately reasoned what's called a kal vachomer about himself, a certain kind of rabbinic argument, where if something applies in the easier case, then it also applies kind of in the harder case. So if something so soft can bore through that which is hard, that is, if the water can bore into the stone, is it not all the more so true that words of Torah, which are hard as iron, can etch their way into my heart, which is only flesh and blood? He immediately began to study Torah. He and his son went and sat with a teacher of small children, right? he wasn't embarrassed to do this. He basically went to the schoolhouse with his kid. He went to elementary school, and Akiva said to the teacher, "Master, teach me Torah." Akiva took hold of a slate, as did his son, and the tutor wrote the letters Aleph and Bet. Rabbi Akiva learned them. Then Aleph through Tav, and he learned the alphabet. Then the book of Leviticus, which was the first book they would teach school children back then, because this was a time shortly after the destruction of the temple, and people needed to know the laws of ritual purity and how to bring sacrifices on all of the kinds of spirituality that was connected with the temple cult. And he learned it too. He continued to study this until he had mastered the entire Torah. So this is, to me, a beautiful story that exemplifies for us what the practice of Netzach looks like in action, right? And it's not that we are applying a kind of determined effort that's very harsh and overbearing, right? We're not trying to win a war, per se, when we practice Netzach. It's more like the single drop of water falling on the stone, right? One drop at a time, right? And we can really apply that in our meditation practice, because by show of hands, how many of us get a little bit anxious when we're sitting down to meditate and someone says, "We're going to meditate now for 45 minutes." Right? Has it ever happened to you? I remember one time, I was sitting for 45 minutes on a meditation retreat, and it felt like an eternity. My legs were hurting, my back was hurting, my mind was all over the place. I didn't understand what I was supposed to be doing. And I just could not wait for it to be over. And I only made it to the end kind of by the skin of my teeth, through the sheer power of my will. But here we have a different paradigm, right? It's not 45 minutes. It's this breath. And now this breath. And now this breath. And now this sensation. And now this thought, right? And now this breath. And this breath. And all of us can take a single mindful breath. Isn't that true? Let's try that right now. Let's all just take one mindful breath, bring our full awareness to the physical sensations of breathing. Just breathe in and see if you can, with determination, but a soft, kind of persistent quality of attention, just follow the breath from the very beginning of the breath through its very conclusion. Okay, did you succeed? Give me thumbs up if you succeeded in that. That was Netzach, right? And then you, once again, come back to intention. You do one more breath, and it's not hard and overbearing and harsh. We're not forcing ourselves to be present. It's soft like water, right? It's cooling like water. So let's sit like that for a little bit. And it doesn't have to be the breath if the breath doesn't feel like a safe home base for you, right? You could focus on the sensations of your feet making contact with the floor, or sounds as they arise and pass away. The eyes can be open or closed, whichever feels more supportive for you, more regulating for you. If the eyes are open, allow them to be downcast. Allow your gaze to be soft. And in a moment or two, I'll say more about how we bring this quality of gevura, of discipline, into our Netzach practice as a way to really bolster and deepen our Netzach. Let's set an intention to practice Netzach, to be present moment by moment by moment, in a soft but persistent way, in a warm yet determined manner. The mind won't become calm and concentrated through the sheer power of our overbearing will. Instead, it's one drop of mindfulness and another drop of mindfulness and another drop of awareness and another mindful moment. And little by little, these moments build momentum and add up to a big result, making a deep impression in our psyche. When you're ready, you can also bring a little bit of gevura, the soft but determined kind of restraint, discipline. When we notice the mind wandering off, becoming diffuse, we just rein it in a little bit, gathering our attention back into our anchor, not indulging the mind's need to constantly be reaching for something else. We can say to the wandering mind, okay, but not now, maybe later. We keep our attention contained, focused, steady. And we notice how doing so helps us to go the distance, moment by moment, how it bolsters our netzach. Here too, our gevura doesn't need to be harsh or overbearing, but it does need to be firm and resolute. course, we may experience obstacles or setbacks along the way. But Netzach knows not a single moment of awareness, no spiritual effort, no matter how small, is ever wasted. Every moment of awareness is valuable. Every time we meet a setback and we come back to presence is valuable. So we'll pause here, and you're welcome to continue practicing beyond the sound of the bell. As I turn it back over to Josh.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everybody, for your practice. We will have a chance in just a moment to have some Q&A and some reflection on the practice today, and I hope you will join us for that. And if you need to leave us, we wish you tzedchem l'shalom, farewell, and come back soon. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same channel. We also have an opportunity now for those who are remembering loved ones to recite the Mourner's Kaddish. Thanks to Rachel for putting the text up there and handling our tech support today in general. If there's someone you are remembering today, please feel welcome to put their name in the chat, and you can unmute as well and recite the Mourner's Kaddish along with me. Yitkadal,
Yitkadash Rabbi, B'yama Divrach Yutei, B'nich Lakutei, V'chayachon V'yamachon V'chayachon Beit Yisrael, V'agala B'zman Kari V'ru, Amen.
Amen.
Rabba Mavarach
Shmei Rabba
May Rabba Baruch Le'olam Lamed Omaya.
Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitba'ar
Ela Min Kol Birkata B'Shirata,
Yitbar
Birkata
V'yitpaleh
V'Ekemata
V'yitpalal
Amen.
Shmei
Amen.
Kedusha Ela Min Kol Birchata V'Shirata V'Berkata V'Nechemata V'Amen Ba'al V'Shema Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chaim
Salama
Aleinu
Rabba Min Shamaya
V'Yisrael
Bakayim
Amen.
Amen.
Useh Shalom B'Imramam
Amen.
Uyaseh Shalom Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Kol Yoshvei
Hallelujah. Kol Yisrael. Yod Israel. Imaru. Amen.
Right. Thank you, everybody. We'll bring Sam back up. And if you have questions, we invite you to please put them into the chat. Just put question in all caps beforehand. That helps us to distinguish, and obviously share comments that you have, and have a conversation. Always happens in the chat as well. So we really welcome that. Thank you. Sam, thank you so much for that practice. And I want to invite folks maybe also just to maybe share. I would ask you, Sam, to personally reflect on this, but also others, where this sort of practicing Netzach right now is kind of showing up for you, for us. You asked us, to just by show of hands, who, if it's sort of a familiar chord in our life. We saw a lot of hands, and I think the notion of resilience. But yeah, I'm wondering for you now this year, this Omer, how you're experiencing this part of the practice and where it's showing up in your own life.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Appreciate the question, and I'd love to hear from others as well in the chat or otherwise. I'm noticing the need for Netzach in a number of areas of my life right now. First of all, some of you may know that we have a child with a number of disabilities, and just being there for her every day and making the kinds of adjustments that we need to make every day to be able to help her to be resilient and regulated, and encountering setbacks and kind of retooling and getting back on the path of being really steady and supportive for her, is definitely a practice in Netzach. And we've actually had to recently pull her from school and put her in a day program, and she'll be transferring to a therapeutic school in the fall, and I hope that will all work out well. But this is a many years project. And for those who are parents of children with disabilities here, or those who suffer from disabilities, I really want to just give you some kavod, give you some dignity, tip my kippah to you. That is a serious practice in Netzach. And not only just in Netzach, but in the kind of Netzach we were talking about, which is like bringing that persistent effort and determination to be of service and help and support day in, day out, but doing it in a soft way, right? So that the work feels like we're really bringing the love and the care of that water, right? The gentleness of that water day in, day out. I've also felt that I've needed to really call on my Netzach in terms of just staying really regulated and calm, and remaining kind of a non-anxious presence in the midst of the political turmoil we're experiencing right now, and the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. It's interesting. I just notice how so many different weather patterns kind of move through my awareness, and so much conditioning, both inherited and based on my own upbringing and the choices I've made, throughout my life, is kind of pulling me into a state of anxiety, worry, fear, agitation, defensiveness. And it's a real Netzach practice for me just to come back and remind myself, oh, wait, my intention is to be calm, right? Clear-headed, present, compassionate, loving, very basic things, but it's a constant practice of coming back to those intentions, and reminding myself of how I want to show up, and then practicing showing up in that way. It's another area where Netzach is really alive for me in my life right now.
Beautiful. Thank you. There's a lot of wonderful comments that are here. I do see a question from Joan about any wisdom to share about using the Sphira, this meditation on Netzach, to actually heal the literal body. I have issues in my right hip. And just want to say, on behalf of the risk management department, we are not licensed to dispense medical advice. So anything that we may say, right now, don't hold us to. It's worth the paper it's printed on. But Sam, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think I've shared before in this venue about living with chronic pain, which is a feature of my daily life and has been since I was in my roughly mid-20s. There's a couple things I want to say. First is that the word refuah and healing is related to the root resh pei yud. It comes from another root, but it's related to the root resh pei yud. The root of refuah is resh pei aleph. But resh pei yud is related to the Hebrew word rafui, which means loose or slack, right? And even if we can't find relief from the physical symptoms, there's a way in which our training in mindful awareness can help us find more spaciousness and allow us to loosen some of the mental constriction and gripping that we experience around the physical pain, which, at least in my experience, enables me to be with the pain in a way that feels more workable and serviceable and less overwhelming. And sometimes I've even had the experience of having the pain present, but without any added layer of mental suffering, right? Which often comes from the resistance and the gripping and the holding and the kind of pushing against the pain. That's the first thing I want to say. But the second thing I want to say is that actually there's a Netzach practice, and actually, if we're able, and this takes kind of ongoing practice. And first we can start small and work our way up to more difficult kinds of physical pain and different kinds of ailments. But if we're able to actually have a netzach practice of, in a very soft but persistent way, turning our attention into the pain itself, which is something that I first learned how to do early on in my meditation practice, then what tends to happen, at least for me, is that instead of being this nondescript kind of solid, immovable object, the pain can be seen for what it is, which is an aggregate of impermanent sensations that are actually moving in the vast kind of limitless space of consciousness. And when I do that, the pain no longer feels afflictive, So years ago, I had this horrible illness. Josh was actually privy to this because we were in rabbinical school together, and I had to have many surgeries, and I was just in excruciating pain for a long time. And I was sitting there one Sunday morning, meditating. I was relatively new to meditation. And but what I'd been doing in my meditation practice is learning to befriend my experience, unbeknownst to me. I didn't even realize I was doing that, but they would tell us, observe the breath. And when thoughts come up, try to hold them non-judgmentally, with a lot of love, with a lot of compassion, and then come back. And just in that very act of holding thoughts non-judgmentally with compassion, I was learning how to create a kind of hospitable environment for my inner experience, no matter, what it was like, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And so I was sitting there this one morning, and there was just so much physical pain. I just felt like someone was hitting me between the eyes with a sledgehammer every couple of seconds, literally. And for the first time in my life, because no one ever taught me how to do this, I turned toward the pain. And I said, okay, you're going to be around for a long time. At least I think that's the case. So come in and be my teacher. And in that moment, as I said before, something miraculous happened. The pain didn't disappear at all. But instead of being this harsh, angular, tight object, this kind of immovable, intransigent object, right? Suddenly it was floating in the vast expanse of awareness. And I could feel that it was pulsing in and out. It was gripping me and releasing me, and gripping me and releasing me, and gripping me and releasing me. And I had my first experience in my life of pain without suffering, because the mental resistance disappeared, and all of this just came by turning toward the pain and actually focusing my attention on it. Now, there's times when doing that is contraindicated, and if the pain is just too overwhelming, that our mind begins to tighten and narrow, and our heart becomes defensive, and the body becomes agitated, and it's a good idea to kind of ease off. Again, we want our netzach to be soft and not totally overbearing, and we don't want to push so hard or stretch so hard that we injure ourselves psychically or emotionally, right? But if one is able, we can actually turn toward the pain and make it the object of our attention and investigate, what's it made up of? What are the different sensations that comprise this perception of pain, and are they permanent or are they changing? They have a life to them. Do they have a kind of cadence to them, And can we make the mind really wide and open and spacious, which is actually its natural way of being when it's not kind of constricted by all kinds of thought patterns and egoic clinging, right? Can we allow the mind to kind of fall open and be very open and vast as we're holding the pain? And in my experience, that kind of way of being in relationship with the pain is profoundly healing, not because the pain disappears, but again, because the mental affliction falls away, and then the pain feels bearable. So whoever's in pain here, right, I want to bless you that you should be totally pain-free. And if that's not possible, right, the word refuah itself suggests that we can find some spaciousness some expanse, some ease, even in the midst of physical travail. And if you can't eliminate your pain, may that be the case for you, as it has been for me.
Yeah. And there was a question, I was looking for it, but I lost it, but I think you already sort of responded to us, thinking about chesed, and the relationship between chesed and netzach. They're both on the right side, right? And
Yeah.
and here, you're sort of describing that, like it's a counterintuitive, sort of victory. I mean, I can't help but think, of when we think of netzach, the term that's been used in Israel for the last year and a half on billboards all over is, "B'yachad ninatzeach," together we will win. We will be victorious. And that's a particular type of victory, which is, I think, in the way I think it's often deployed and understood is not what we're talking about here. It's not like somehow, there's like a victory and then it's over and like there's a surrender. It's a very different, sort of spiritual type of winning, in the sense of being liberated from fighting this battle of suffering, which, of being trapped by this pain and the response that we may have to that pain, and instead sort of becoming larger than it, is what you just described really beautifully.
Yeah, totally. And look, without getting political or weighing the merits of the war, its demerits, or whatever the case may be, it's true that in war, generally, right, we're operating from a zero-sum kind of mentality. And that's not what Netzach is all about, right? It's not, I'm going to win and you're going to lose, right? Or for me to win, you have to lose. It's actually, that through the persistence that we apply in spiritual practice, in cultivating certain habits of heart and mind, we can actually create conditions where everyone wins, right? Because the more I can stick with the project of cultivating a compassionate heart, the more I win, and the more the people in my life who are suffering win, right? The more I can stay with the project of cultivating loving kindness in relation to my experience, and then apply that same quality of heart to the people in my circle, the more I win, because loving kindness is a quality that kind of opens the heart and eases our suffering. And the more you win. The Dalai Lama once said that, when it comes to material resources, the more I have, right? The more I give away, the less I have. That's how it is with material resources. But with spiritual resources, the more we give away, the more we have, right? The more compassion we give, the more compassionate we become, right? The more love we give, the more loving we become, right? The more happiness we share with others, the happier we become, the more mindfulness we bring into the world, the more mindful we become. So there's no zero-sum game here, and the work is lifelong and ongoing. We don't finally reach some point, of victory and say, that's it, I'm done, I can walk away. Our conditioning will continue to assail us and get us into hot water and cause us to behave in ways that are out of alignment with our noblest intentions. And Netzach says, okay, I can get up, I can brush myself off, and I can get back to work.
Beautiful. Reminiscent of the Talmudic teaching that, when if you have a cup of water, right, and you pour half of it, you now both have half a cup of water and you've lost half. But when you have a candle and you light another candle, then, you both have light and you actually haven't lost anything. So
exactly.
Yeah, a deep teaching there. All right, we are at our time. I want to thank Sam so much for your teaching, which has clearly been so warmly received. If you want to save the chat, which a lot of people do, the 3 dots at the top of the chat box, you can click on that and it says save chat, and it'll go down into it'll come to your computer. The shefa will flow down into your computer. And we will be back tomorrow, same time and same channel, at 12:30 Eastern. And I hope you can join us then or whenever you can. Thanks again to Rachel for our support today, and we will see you soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Be well.